first of all, thanks for all the talks. I think there is a bit of a polarization and an extremity going from the simplicity and dogmatic idea of using a textile formwork, moving towards the criticism of the architecture of the last 30 years up until today. What do we need to do to actually simplify buildings? All the way to Brandon's talk on completely reducing down to a simple stone. So all of these different talks at the same time are also introducing some kind of new complexity, which you were also mentioning a bit. And I would like to hear a bit from all three of you on a different perspective. Where do you see the next step to move towards these more simple structures? Where is the digital, where we've been trying to really, I would almost dare to say, complexify the world. We've been complexifying geometry to save materials, and now we have this polarizing point of view that really says we can actually use more, but the complexity starts to emerge somewhere else. So maybe starting with you, Thomas, can start on this, give a reflection.
No, not sure if I really have the answer. I mean, we had this discussion briefly. When we think of simplicity, what is simple? Is it the construction? Is it the operation? Is it end of life, like disassembly? What do we want, or is it design? And usually we say building simple requires a lot, makes design much more complicated. So I think we really need to focus. But in any case, I mean, we are in research projects together. I think this idea of simplicity, let's say, doesn't mean that there is no position for digital fabrication or digital design. The opposite is actually the case. I think it can really help us. I would just wonder if we always have the right objective in mind, and if we have see where we can have more relevance. I think that's something we need to be aware of, where we put in our research, where we put in our energy. But anyway, there's so much to do. There's so much requests on new constructions all over the world. We're talking about 2 to 3 billion people who are going to get urbanized over the next decades. We are talking about fixing our building stock. And so we need solutions on all levels. We can't say there is no room for digital fabrication. I mean, it's like we need everything that helps us, let's say, in this pace to become much better than what we do today.
Mm-hmm. Maybe you, Mariana?
I have, just to resonate with what you're saying, I have actually 2 directions for the answer. One is that we usually need to get to a simple design, we usually first go through all of the complexity, solve a lot of the complexity, and then start stripping it down back to the simple. So something that seems simple in the end took a lot of complexity to get to that simpleness. And perhaps that's where we are. We're exploring this, we're pushing the complexity so we can come back to the simplicity, having learned how we can get there. And on the other hand, it would be, well, usually the path known is the shortest path. So we're trying to discover another path. And once we are equipped with the tools of understanding how to do that, how to deal with materials, how to understand those, how to understand the tools, how to develop the tools that enable that path to be simple, then it will be easier than what it is now. So simplicity always has something to do with its relationship to where we are and the design in that sense. So I think there's a lot of room, but we need to find it. So we need to develop those tools to become simple.
Well, maybe I should start by saying, despite my preoccupation with stones, I'm a card-carrying member of the digital fabrication community, and I appreciate so much the early work that happened in digital fabrication, which is, I think by early I'm describing the late 90s, mid 2000s. Fascination with surface. There was a lot of folding, pleating, perforation, pattern making that was happening under the guise of efficiency for material's sake. And that's been criticized. It certainly pushed me into looking at heavier things because the history of architecture is carved in stone. That's my position. and yet we really fail to work with that material in an intelligent way today. However, the complexity of that early work, if I take some of the criticism from theorists like Sylvia Lavin, for instance, who had a real problem with creating fields of designers who the end product was to produce complex installations, I always saw those installations as exercises. Like, I'll use an analogy to baseball because I'm an American, but the batter that's up on deck is swinging a bat with weights on it. Why add the complexity? Because you won't be using those weights. They knock the weights off, and then it feels feather light when they're swinging and they're not thinking about the weight. So I always found those installations to be those complex weights that are exercises to think about how we can build intelligence. And what came from that was not a physical result of all buildings surrounding us were going to look like that going into the future, but that the intelligence that that exercise charged us with is starting to pervade into the discipline of architecture. So I find that to be a way of distilling the essential quality of how we should be designing, and I think that's what we're identifying as being simple.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you. I think there is more question. One thing that sort of is, I think, important to think about when we discuss simplicity, and we saw it also through the work, is this idea of the monolithic, and then again the code. And it struck me with you, Thomas, that you said you worked on the verge of what is allowed in terms of energy efficiency. And if we want to move forward with more simple construction, then we need to make much more awareness in this regard, right? If we want to build in pure stone, what is your take on this, and what was your way to push almost to the edge of the boundary in terms of the norm to build as you did in the simple housing project?
I mean, I struggled for a while with this issue of efficiency. Sometimes I say we are in an efficiency trap. Mm-hmm. It's always towards efficiency, but do not recognize that we don't achieve what we want to achieve anymore. And so I'm struggling a bit that with the new code, I assume they increase again the requirements on efficiency. This efficiency first quote I used is actually the driver for our central government. That's their policy. It's written in their website saying like efficiency first. Everything has to be efficiency first. That's why I used this phrase. I have some concerns that they how can I say that they don't understand this, that it's a failure. Of course, it's also not black and white. We also can't say we start to waste. But anyway, we reached a level where this continuously increasing efficiency doesn't get us anywhere. But I'm not sure if I answered your question. But we designed towards the minimum what was necessary, requested by code at that time. It's going to get more pretty soon. But what was important is that the spatial qualities, I mean, we did interviews with people, the spatial qualities were influencing how people use space, and this is the reason why we don't have a performance gap. So it's very different aspects at the end of the day than just efficiency, which creates sustainability.
Mm-hmm. I find it interesting that on one hand, you have to fight a bit on the edge of the norm for using more but wise. And then when we look at what is happening in digital fabrication over the last decade, where I think your work, Mariana, is really a picture of that, where we were trying to reduce, but we can't really put it into any real constructions because it's also on the verge of what is actually within the norms. So we are really playing at the boundaries of two different norm conditions, reducing materials, using material-wise, and I don't know, even when you've been doing your pavilions, there has been a need to also get permits to build them, right? In some extent. You chose Italy and Mexico, so maybe you were lucky not to, but maybe a few words on this, because it's really something we see also as a boundary condition on the other end of the spectrum, is always the norms, right?
No.
So maybe...
I don't really have a leg to stand on the norms. Let's put it this way. Yes, I've chosen Mexico and Italy, but or they chose us. And it's museums, so they've been largely treated as artworks and temporary works, meaning that the norms apply a little bit differently in that sense. I find it difficult to answer your question because actually the work that we're doing, yes, or in this sense, might still work within the norms because it's not actually, it doesn't really have an impact on the final structure, and usually the norms are quite targeted to the final structure that is standing there. You do have norms for form work, of course, but they're slightly more lenient than you would have for a final structure, right? And when you start dealing with lightweight things, then it becomes easier, and it becomes easier to show that it would work in a temporary context. But without having a case-by-case application of a sort of specific by testing proof, you can't really implement it. And that's the truth.
I sense you would like to say something, Brandon, but I would like to open up to the audience because I think this is a pressing topic, and I think there must be some questions that are related or comments.
But maybe just one sentence. Yeah. I think this last project I showed might be the bridge between this question of, let's say, efficiency driven, produced with digital fabrication, but also then the idea of, let's say, plentiness and robustness, etc., etc. Yeah. So I think there are ways, and we try to explore them.
Are there questions, comments in the audience? Yes? Where do we have the mic? Katrin?
Thank you very much for this amazing panel. I was really looking forward to bringing this topic to the conference, and I think with this selection, I think it's just amazing. I would like to challenge this idea of mass again and time frame. No? So because the stone actually stands for something that is so archaic and something that stands forever, let's say. No? And currently we are calculating also this efficiency, what you're bringing in a time frame that is maybe not the right time frame that we currently calculate. So I would like to hear a little bit about that.
Brandon.
Okay. Well, I might return the question with the idea of permanence, which is a huge fallacy in architecture. We are a profession, I mean, I should say the building industry really, when we say permanent, we mean 30 years. And I think that's a problem. So we're training, we're educating architects under a mandate that you will build for permanence. So much so that Mariana's work has to be set outside of the norm. And it's not real architect. That's not a criticism. I'm saying the opposite. And I think my challenge would be to say that we need to expand the timescales beyond the 30-year mandate that the mortgage industry gave us, and we just blindly inherit, and to start to ask in our prompts for architecture to design for a particular period of time, whether that is shorter or much longer. And I think that's one way of approaching ideas of, are we looking for an architecture that's nimble or substantial?
Is everybody, I don't know, I seem a bit of a sleepy audience, very hungry, and I don't know if there are more questions here. Carla. So there is one here.
Thank you very much as well for the very inspiring things you said about architecture. And what I liked is that for the first time we hear something about how we use energy, because all the other topics were dealing with blockchain. We know it uses a lot of energy. BMW is, for example, producing very big cars that produce as well, or are using a lot of energy. And you were questioning the whole thing about norms. And the question would be if the norms that we have to fulfill or that are dictated about how buildings should be, especially in Germany. I remember one talk about Francis Quéré talking about how difficult it is for him to build a school in Germany because the norms are so terrible, and maybe is there a solution for that, maybe to change it, because we know as well that norms are driven or dictated sometimes by industry because certain things needs to be done or to be sold. So what is your opinion about that?
I mean, there are all these discussions now, and it's more driven by can we reduce costs of construction if we reduce the level of norms and codes that we have to apply in the building industry. I'm struggling indeed with, I'm coming from energy, that's our energy code, that's where I'm struggling the most with, which is kind of funny because we were always advocating for efficiency, so we were part of this, and now all of a sudden we say maybe we went a bit too far, indeed. Beyond that, I really always point out that in these buildings in Bad Aibling, we fulfilled all codes. There was no. I think the bigger problem we are facing is more what's brought into the construction industry, into the design. Where, when we work on an office building today, there is a certain, let's say, expectation on comfort, on climate, on air conditioning. That's not written in any code. The amount of parking we have to build is zoning bylaw is not written in any code. So the biggest problem is more like what the society brings as a request into architecture, into design and construction. That's what I think. It's not so much the codes.
So I have many questions. I tried to summarize them in one long paragraph. So it goes like this. I am quite interested by Thomas' lecture about not thinking on efficiency as a way to get to sustainability. So one of the questions that I have is that efficiency depends on the stakeholders' point of view. This is what you're saying. If you're looking at efficiency based on glass, occupation, and facade, it's different than what you get if you're thinking about the structure. So how do you propose we measure sustainability if we have what we heard in the first panel, this stakeholder mix-up, that everybody wants something different? So I'm just really thinking, how do you really talk about sustainability if it is that much complex? And if you use the term sustainability, sometimes even the design is not important. Just because you're saying it's sustainable, we just have to be happy. And sometimes it doesn't even mean that you are creating a sustainable building based on your topic.
I'm not sure if I can answer, but let me give you two examples. Like the one is this Bad Aibling, we built a floor-to-ceiling height of 3.10 meters, and we are totally convinced, and this is what the questionnaire shows, that this is the reason why people do not frequently open the window, because they say it's so airy that they feel like they always have good air quality. What we see in this kind of compressed spaces, driven by efficiency we build today, by an economic efficiency, we see a very different behavior. So this is one example from construction where I believe that efficiency doesn't get us anywhere. The other thing, nothing is efficient in nature. Nothing. And we always talk about bio-inspired and bio-driven, etc., but basically nothing in nature is efficient. Maybe don't waste should be the paradigm, but not efficiency. Now, what's the metric? That's a good question. So how we make it then tangible, what's sustainable. But the ultimate metric is like what they used in Switzerland for the 2,000 watt societies, like the footprint per person. Like we build a zero energy passive house, blah, 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 use huge amount of materials, but then there is one person living on 200 square meters and nobody talks about it, nobody cares, driving with his super efficient electric SUV every day 50 kilometers to work. So that's the metrics we use today do not get us anywhere. Yeah.
I have one last question, but this is for Thomas, and I would really like to hear your feeling about this. So I was trying to find a similar analogy between complicated and complex, knowing that they are not the same with the term simple. Because in Spanish, I understand there are two terms to refer to something that is perfectly articulated and it's simple, that's in Spanish, or something that is just easy. I don't know if you have thought about that. If there's something between complicated and complex, or simple and...
I suppose you mean Brandon, right?
Yes. Brandon, sorry.
Okay. Okay. Complicated and complex. Yeah. I mean, I think universally we're going to ascribe complex as a positive attribution and complicated is pejorative. Maybe, you know, some of the sentiments that I was talking about before about the kind of aesthetic qualities of digital fabrication was that along the lines there was a confusion of whether we're looking for complex or complicated. And so much of the derivative work that came out would, you know, quantify the values of that work based on the number of nails that are used in it, for instance, as if that's a positive attribution. But that's complicating something that is not building complexity that would be applicable to something else, I would say. So I don't know if I'm really answering your question directly, but I do think that the two words are misused in between. I tend to push my students towards thinking about complex as something that will be applicable to another application, that you can transcribe something from something else, and if it maintains its value, then the complexity comes with it. It's like, this is getting into like Aristotelian philosophy of the essence of something, right? If something maintains that essence, then that's the complexity.
Thank you.
Thank you. More questions, or should we start slowly ending the topic that I think needs to be opened up, hopefully in the next future of construction, that we start discussing more what it means to simplify, what it means to actually maximize material to simplify construction and the durability of our buildings. I hope we can continue this discussion also in the future and also in the lunch break. So I would like to say thank you to our panel, to our speakers in the panel, and thank you very much.